Right, good evening to everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We are in Isaiah in chapter 2, and have been looking at the first 4 verses. We spent some time on what the latter days meant, or what they were referring to, and I want you to know and understand that these 4 verses can be seen in Acts chapter 2. When he talks of the latter days, we won't go through all that again, but it's indicative of the last parts of the days. And so we see the gospel age is what I'm getting at in the first 4 verses. And Isaiah does this. We will see some things applicable to his time, but then he looks far ahead to the coming of the gospel, and of course involved in that is the coming Christ, the servant that would suffer for the sins of man, and he will refer to that, and then go into something more local. I'll put it that way, but Isaiah chapter 2 is very important. And I wanted you to understand some things about the prophecy is what I was trying to get at last time. We looked at verse 2, but verse 3, and we talked a little bit, and we'll see more about Zion. But he says, for out of Zion, in verse 3, shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. This prophecy, in a way, is God's challenge to all of us, to people that read and will look and understand, because this is very daring again. He gives the place and what's going to happen at this place. And it's not it's the law is going to go forth out of the Middle East. Well, really? I mean, that's kind of pretty general, but he gets down to the place. And so you can check it. God challenges us to check the prophecies. And when you see that the prophecies are correct and fulfilled just the way it was written 1,000 years ago, it should bring forth faith that this is the Word of God, this through the prophet is right, and the prophet should be listened to, and what is happening is part of God's plan for the salvation of man. So again, it all works together in this way, and I want you to notice that the prophets are daring. They just speak forth, and they speak it forth exactly, and the exactness is what is very impressive. I mean, we can prophesy, but man prophesies in such general terms, it fits anything, anytime, anywhere. Not so the prophets. The time, the place, what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. And even the captivity, 70 years. 70 years, not 69, not 71, 70 years. Okay, now, let's, before we go on, I wanted to look at verse 3. Did you have anything that you wanted to add from the last time about verse 2 and the latter days, the last days? He'll mention this 2 or 3 more times in Isaiah, speaking about the days that would come. Okay, notice he says in verse 3, and many people, referring to the Lord's house be established, exalted above the hills, all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, come ye and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, the word of the law from Jerusalem. All right. Now, something about what's he, the word teach us his ways, why is that important? Teach us his ways. Of course, this is not the old law. This is something new. And did it take place? Who was teaching of the ways? Jesus and Jesus through his apostles. Notice, turn with me to John, the Gospel of John, and chapter 6. Chapter 6. And Jesus gives us the importance of this. And what would take place. John 6 and verse 44. No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. Now, how does God draw anybody? In what way does he draw men? All right, through the word. He tells us in verse 45, it is written in the prophets, and they shall be all taught of God. Every man, therefore, that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. There is a teaching going on that draws men, and men make a choice in what God has presented. The new covenant, God offers it. It's under his terms. He says, will you do this? And we say, by obedience, yes, we will. We will follow your word. All right. Now, the law goes forth, and I want you to think on the terms of what unites people. What is something that throughout history, several things can and do unite people? Can you think of two or three things, one thing? What unites people? Excuse me?
A wedding.
All right, wedding. And we'll put that in the realm of culture of people, men's culture. Traditions and values and race and marriage and family and these kind of things. Social standing in culture, that's a uniting thing. Something else that unites.
A common enemy.
Is that, did I hear you right? Yes, sir. Okay. Something common that we have that glue that we must war against someone or something. All right, think back of the Tower of Babel. What was taking place there? Were people united? Why were they united? They wanted to build a tower. They had a purpose, but how did Genesis 11 begin? Yes, ma'am. They all had language, all united under the same language. Then in the other side, how were they divided? Yeah. Yes, the confusion of many languages. Okay, language. What about attitudes? Unite people. And thing about attitudes, though, they're very changeable. Fear, hate, love, goals, desires, those things can unite men. Strong people, strong men can unite. But that's in a limited sense, because once the strong man dies, then many times there is no unity anymore. But now, what about law? How important is law to the things that we've been talking about that unite? What about law? Well, it may be the greatest uniter of all. It can cover all the other ground, or all the other things, if you will. Amos gives in Amos chapter 3, you remember, can two do something? Walk together unless they be agreed. All right, now in that sense, is it, well, God compromises with us, and you do a little bit of obedience and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then we all get along. Is that the idea of how you walk with God, walk together. It's a submission, isn't it, to God's way and His will. We let Him lead. But this idea of law, who can law cover? Think of the gospel now. The gospel, the perfect law of liberty in James. Who can the gospel cover? Think of Ephesians. Can the gospel cover race, culture, sex, men, women, or not? Everybody say, yes, this can, because it does. It does. The law goes forth. All men can be united under what goes forth from Jerusalem. It excludes none who will submit to it.
That's the key. It will only unite those who submit to it. Having, for example, having a common goal does not necessarily unite people unless you have also a common procedure or method and a common leadership.
Yeah.
That's what happened at Tower of Babel. The gods confounded their language. They couldn't talk together anymore. They couldn't plan
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So they started, going off on their own ways.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Describes the religious world today, doesn't it?
And yes, and it brings me to the point, like the gospel law, what did Paul say? That he wants them to all speak what? The same thing. Thank you. The same thing. Now that doesn't mean we everything. My vernacular is the same as your vernacular. It is the idea of unity in the gospel. We have purpose that we have decided to obey. And we have something to obey, something that was given, something that came forth from Zion. So, now, this is the result of what comes forth, and we can see this in the spiritual sense. He's not looking at the physical things, he's using the physical to describe something. In verse 4, he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, if this was literal, what about this? How much harvesting instruments can a sword give you? I mean, you got a sword, or a short sword, or a long sword, and can you make something that you can pull behind oxen? No, this is a spiritual sense. What is his point here about this new law goes forth? It goes forth from Jerusalem, and what is the result of it?
Later, he told Pilate, if my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, but I would not be delivered to the Jews. That ties right in with this about the no more war. We're not going to win people to Christianity by beating them up.
Okay, all right, thank you. And he tells us in Ephesians about the spiritual instruments of war, and in I think 2 Corinthians 10 about the spiritual warfare. It is, what are we trying to defeat and win in the spiritual warfare? All right, it's a battle for a war for the souls of men. Now, but he says, neither shall they learn war anymore. So what is involved in this? If you play as a kid, and back when I was a kid, we had different groups, and it was against one another, and something had happened, and the kid would say, "This means war." Well, what does war mean? All right, it's an enforcement by nations of their will upon another by the use of what? Force, power that they can exert upon another. Now, but what in physical war, you might defeat the enemy, but what do you not defeat in the enemy or about the enemy? What is not necessarily defeated, even though they're overcome by physical power? All right, his desire to do it in the future. Okay, the French acted a certain way under German occupation, okay? In a general sense, they were forced to act a certain way. What about their mindset, though? They thought a different way, didn't they? Now, the point is people's hearts are changed in this beating up the plowshares. It's a total change. What you have swords, and then what? What are plowshares and pruning hooks, and how's that different from swords? What's it represent? What's a sword represent? So, war, force, it can be defensive, but it means that you can certainly use it to hurt somebody else and to achieve your desires. What about these other things? What are they? Peace. Peace. There is a harvesting. There is a different attitude, a different total change from one to the other. It's from verse 3. He will teach us his ways. Teach us his ways. You're not going to use force to change people because it's not a real change, because it's not it's not toward the heart, and it's not a lasting change either. As soon as people rebel, I mean, by force, they get the chance, they rebel again. But this is something different. This is from God and through his Christ and his apostles, and they presented this thing called the gospel on the day of Pentecost. And on that day, give me a term or two in Acts chapter 2 that showed the people that were not inclined to be against one another, but they were united. What were some phrases on Pentecost that illustrated this after they obeyed? Excuse me? Okay, there was unity there, wasn't there? Unity. And they were all with one accord. And in fact, the general people even liked the way they acted. So, again, a great difference. Complete change of heart, the result from teaching of his ways. All right, do you have anything that you'd like to add or bring up through verse 4? Okay. Again, just remember, there's no conversion by force. Not by force. Now, he goes on, O house of Jacob, come ye and let us walk in the light of the Lord. And therefore thou hast spoken thy people, thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. Their land is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end to their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, neither is there any end to their chariots. Their land is full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And the mean or common man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself. Therefore forgive them not. All right. He says, come ye, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Why does this have to be mentioned? Come ye is kind of an invitation, isn't it? But why does he have to say this? Yes, they hadn't been doing this. These were, again, the covenant people. These were God's people, the Israelites. And they had not been doing this. Walk in the light of the Lord. Why is it called light? The light of the Lord. What's something that light would do? I'm sorry? Sure, you can see. Things are exposed. The path, the trail, the way is clear. God's light, God's will, teach us of his ways. Their attitude. Now this is a different time period, but let's go to Jeremiah in chapter 44. And I want you to look at verse 4 and a few other verses in Jeremiah 44. Because now Jeremiah was, it was again, it was the covenant people of God, but what had happened? What did Jeremiah observe, see, understand, and know? Jeremiah was the prophet that saw what? What was he? Why is he called the crying prophet? The sins that people were committing? Okay, great idolatry. And because of that, what great cataclysmic event? Okay, Jerusalem, he saw the great city, the temple would fall. But their attitude is really bad in this sense. In verse 4, Jeremiah 44, and it's the same thing that God was doing with Isaiah previously. Howbeit I sent unto you all my servants the prophets, rising early and sending them, saying, Oh, do not this abominable thing that I hate. God's mercy through the prophets again to turn men back to God. Now, verse 9, notice this. Have you forgotten the wickedness of your fathers and the wickedness of the kings of Judah and the wickedness of their wives and your own wickedness and the wickedness of your wives which they have committed in the land of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? Have you done what? Forgotten. Have you forgotten? And they had. They're getting reminded now. Notice verse 16, their response. As for the word that thou, this is what they say to Jeremiah. As for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Lord, what's their response? What's their attitude, their mindset? We will not let. Now, that's kind of definitive, isn't it? You didn't say, well, speak to us some more, Jeremiah. Let's hear a little bit more. I'm almost convinced. Just give me another day, give me another hour, give me a little while longer. Is that what their attitude is? Total, absolute rejection. Verse 17, they not only rejected, they threw it back at Jeremiah's face, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of heaven, to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, our princes, in the cities of Judah, and in the streets of Jerusalem, for then had we plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. Now let me clarify some of that, because they were in trouble. They were in dire straits. And their attitude was what? Forsake the idols that got us into this situation? What was their response? We're in this trouble because we didn't obey the idols enough. Not enough. We're going to go do it some more. This arsenic I took last night just made me feel terrible. I'm going to take a few more gallons of it and see what happens and cure myself. That's real thinking, isn't it? Now, what is the lesson supposed to be in captivity? In Ezekiel's time, he was by the river Shebar and he was with the captives. What's the lesson supposed to be when Jerusalem fell, when the Babylonians came and the city's destroyed and the fires are still smoking and we're standing here and we've got chains on us now and we're headed to who knows where to serve the Babylonians? What are they supposed to be thinking? We better repent, and even far back to that is, how on earth did we get to this place? What happened? And then that reflection causes some meditation, and then some sense might come into their heads. Now, in like manner, we all need to learn the lesson. The world needs to learn, the church needs to learn the lesson that forsaking God brings what? It brings disaster. Brings disaster. What's the definition of stupid? Doing the same thing and you expect a different result. I'm going to worship my idols. They failed me, so what am I going to do? I'm going to pour more of myself into worshiping these idols. And it's many times today, we don't tend to apply scriptures to ourselves. I've heard people say many times, he, she, they should listen. You left out somebody, didn't you? He, she, they listen. What is it? What we leave out? I need to listen. I need to listen. I need to listen and learn because I've been taught and walk in that light. So, again, that's Israel. That's the attitude. Even the ones that saw what took place, and even as Isaiah is warning, even the northern kingdom, Assyria is coming. Well, Judah should take note of what took place. Now, they would not capture all of Judah. They would be repelled, but they came mighty close, but they didn't learn. They didn't learn. And the Assyrians would come against the northern kingdom. The Babylons would come against the southern kingdom, all because stubborn behavior. Now, speaking of which, in verse 6, notice, and onward, notice the word full here. You've forsaken thy people because they have replenished from the east and are soothsayers like the Philistines. They adopted what the Philistines had, the soothsayers, and they were full of that superstition. But notice in verse 7, full of silver, full of horses. Verse 8, full of idols. Well, if something's full, what's the room for God? Their hearts are, their mindset, their activities, their hearts are full up in ungodly things. They are satiated with these things, full of silver and gold, soothsayers. They please themselves in the children of strangers. This phrase also, it's not that they just listened a little bit or had some things of the Philistines. They grabbed hold of it and brought it right in. The soothsayers. They listened, the divinations and the hidden arts and magic. The Philistines were well noted for that. Well, we don't need to look it all up, but did the old law speak to this at all? About divinations, soothsayers, witches? Sure it did. In fact, the old law spoke against all of these things. Their land is full of silver and gold. Why is that notable? Why do we take note of that and their obedience or disobedience? Okay, full of this, and it brought with the pagan superstition, and also their trust in this stuff. They please themselves in the children of strangers in the last part of verse 6. It also indicates they strike hands with them. We're with you. We're with you. anything in the New Testament, I'll paraphrase it, don't strike hands with somebody for the Christian. Evil what? Corrupts. Yeah, don't strike hands. Don't adopt the ways of the world. Now, these things about silver and gold full of horses. Now, full of horses, I like horses. I like, if I could feed them, the more the merrier. Okay, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it? Full of horses, what's wrong? What's horses have to do with anything? I'm sorry.
All of these things are just possessions that they have. They're enamored with possessions.
Okay.
Not
The possessions
things that they own, the things that they have.
that does what to their mindset? Like the, excuse me? There, that's it. Okay. They were not to, the kings were not to do this. They were not to multiply your horses and your chariots. Well,
They were to make war. And when a nation wanted to become more powerful, they got more horses and more chariots. And when you overcame another nation, what did you do? You took away their horses and their chariots. And if you didn't need their horses, because you get all you could handle, you killed their horses. Because you did not want them to have power.
okay. Therefore, where was their faith? In themselves, in the and in their things, and I can't remember for sure. I've seen drawings of it, but Solomon's barns, I think each one he had 1,000 head per barn of horses, and no, their faith in God was supposed to protect and help. I'll leave it for Garth, but in the Judges, when something came upon them, what did they do? They looked up to sought the Lord's voice. Lord, what should we do? Shall I go up? Shall he go up? What should we do? Should we fight or not? Yes, go up. I'll be with you. So, but in this case, these horses, it's putting faith in the wrong place. And even with their idols, their silver, their gold, their riches, well, does that sound like anything today? Lives of indulgence, of wonderful things that we have, trusted in the machinery of war. This thing became their own idol, an idol in its own sense. This trust in power of the nation, and you ask, well, where's your power come from? Well, we got money, and we've got chariots, we've got tanks, we've got all this. Yes.
Haines, 1 Kings 4:26 says, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horses.
I'd hate to be the caretaker, wouldn't you, for something like that? There.
What's the common thread between Isaiah, and to me this is a lesson we need to hear. What's the common thread between Isaiah and Jeremiah and the Judges? God, when a nation starts going wrong, God sends prophets and says, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. How many times did they listen? I can only think of one case where a nation or a city specifically turned around and turned away from their evil ways.
And they were not Jews.
But throughout the Old Testament, how did God turn the nation around? God brought great calamity and persecution on the nation.
And that was his way of turning them back, because the thread, the idea is God is saying through the prophets, please come back, please listen to me. But if you don't listen to me, you'll listen to the Assyrians, and you'll listen to the Babylonians, and you'll listen to those people that'll destroy you for sure, because they won't be forgiving, they won't back off, and you'll die. But all of these physical, worldly things, the kings would revel in their power, the people would take comfort and pride in it, and the generals were prone to use it. So let's oppress somebody else. But so, again, full of this, full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. Do you see a thread of disgust in that from the prophet? What is he trying to get them right then to realize something about idols? Where is the origin of idols? Man-made things. Man-made. You know, false teaching and following another gospel that isn't another, what's the difference? You're following something man-made. Man-made. The apostles, the prophets, follow something divine, follow something from heaven. This is the final separation. When you get to the place of idols, that's about it right there with God. He will not take second place. Never has taken second place. And it offends him greatly. We're about out of time, but I want you to notice Isaiah 44. This